that the program today is going to be too long, and to those of you who think the program today is going to be too short. At the end, I hope that as we have coffee and tea just across the way in the von Kleinsmith Center building where the Institute is located, that we can look back and say it was time well spent. So, what are we doing today? We're going to try to understand electoral politics in Armenia and around the world. Armenia's parliamentary election, scheduled for April 2 this year, is going to be historic. With this election, Armenia will transition to a parliamentary system of government where real power is going to shift to the prime minister. The party that gets a majority of the vote will choose the prime minister. So the challenge is to have an election whose results truly represent the will and the voice of the Armenian people. Our discussion here emanates from a public petition initiated by 5 celebrities, all of whom are here with us today, in one form or another. They called for justice within Armenia and for tangible democratic change through civic engagement with the citizens of Armenia. Not for the citizens of Armenia, but with the citizens of Armenia. At the Institute, we decided to use this opportunity that the artists created to further explore electoral politics, democratization, and responsive governance. From Latin America to Africa, why is this a problem? And in Canada and Chile, for example, how was this problem solved? Now, why are we doing this? Because the Institute sees itself as a bridge builder between academic communities and the Armenian world, focusing on enhancing scholarship and making that scholarship accessible to the policymakers in Armenia and in the diaspora. The rest of the world works that way, why shouldn't we? We also believe that scholarship must probe the social, educational, and political challenges facing Armenians. And 2 of those national challenges are creating a strategic cooperation and partnership between diaspora and Armenia, and ensuring Armenia's security, development, and democratization. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. So what do we want today? Today we want to understand that Armenia is neither unique nor alone in trying to tackle these issues. To recognize that the global call for each citizen to do what he or she can do is represented here in the actions of these artists. Their job was to raise voices and call us to attention, and we listened. So what we're doing here, it's called public scholarship. Public scholarship plays a vital role in advancing policy action and in cultural change. And this is neither the first nor the last time that we will be doing this. In a few months, in April and May, we will hold 2 conferences, as you see in the flyers that you received. And that we're calling the conferences End of Transition. And we're very excited and proud that the provost and the vice president of the university are interested in making this conference the reason for a visit to Armenia. I will not introduce the speakers one by one. They deserve an introduction far longer than even what you have before you. But I must say that we're extremely grateful for all 13 of them for making the time to be here today. We're also grateful you're here. Thank you all. Thank you to our guests, and please welcome our moderator, Professor Robert English, who's the Deputy Director of the School of International Relations here at USC. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As you heard, my name is Robert English from the School of International Relations. It's my honor to be moderating today's proceedings. And because time is short and there's so much to discuss, we're going to go straight to our first panel of experts, not so much on Armenia per se, but on other regions and other processes related to democratization, political change, elections, and voting. So I will simply ask them to be coming out right now and introduce them as they take the stage, beginning with Marc Cooper. Marc Cooper is a specialist on Latin America and Chile, author, journalist, and for many years professor here at the University of Southern California. Next, Brett Carter. Brett Carter is my colleague in the School of International Relations and a specialist on sub-Saharan Africa. Hisham Abdel-Rahman, who's joining us from Canada, a specialist on elections, electioneering, and founder of the organization Strategic Voting. And Mark Mullen. Mark Mullen, for many years, was director of the National Democratic Institute in the Republic of Georgia, and also a founder of Transparency International's Georgia chapter. These gentlemen bring enormous wisdom, field experience, and insight into the processes of political change, post-communist transition, democratization. And I will simply turn to each of them. We begin by asking each to give a brief summary of some of the main points from the field, from the experience in their country or region, to get us thinking about Armenia and the Caucasus. So, if I can begin nearest to me with Marc Cooper, again, specialist in Latin America and in particular Chile. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Excuse my voice. I've been down for a few days, so if I croak, I'm not a frog. It may seem counterintuitive to some to ask what in the world does Chile and its transition to democracy have to do with Armenia, with the Armenian case, and the answer is that it has a lot. So in the few minutes that I have here, I'm going to very quickly compress 40 years of history. In 1973, the democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende, for which I worked, was overthrown by a military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet. Now, this resulted in a total and complete shutdown of all political institutions. After 100 years of parliamentary democracy in Chile, basically uninterrupted, it was abolished overnight. Congress was closed, political parties were outlawed, and a reign of terror was imposed where people were hunted down, torture was massive. So it was really a very, very bleak situation. People were disappeared. There was no free expression. It was about as dark as you can get. In 1980, Pinochet imposed a new constitution which made things worse, not better. It institutionalized the dictatorship, and it laid out a plan for the future, a transition to nobody knew what. But what that 1980 Constitution did was said, okay, Pinochet can remain in power 8 more years, and in 1988 we're going to have a plebiscite to see if he continues another 8 years. And if not, then we'll do something. Maybe we'll have elections. Literally like that. So it was, again, even darker by 1980. In the early 1980s, 1983 in specific, more or less spontaneously, protests began to erupt. This was in an atmosphere where there was still a curfew after 10 years of dictatorship. And the protests became massive, and they came from the bottom. They were not coordinated by the political parties in the opposition that had mostly been obliterated. These demonstrations really rocked the regime. By 1988, when the plebiscite was approaching, there was a big debate in the civil society whether or not the opposition on the ground should participate or not in the referendum, assuming that the referendum was going to be rigged by Pinochet. A decision was made by civil society to participate in the referendum with now re-emerging but very tenuous political parties of the opposition. I was there also for the referendum in 1988. Nobody expected Pinochet to lose, but he lost. He didn't expect it either, and he lost. By 1990, there was a purely civilian government elected, and there was the appearance of, I would say, normal democratic norms. Problem was that the Constitution from 1980 was still in effect, and it granted extraordinary powers to Pinochet himself, who was no longer the dictator, but was just the commander of the armed forces forever. It allowed the military to appoint senators. It allowed a National Security Council to override the parliament. I see I only have about a half a minute left, so I'll be very quick. What's happened since 1990, and that's interesting because it coincides more or less with the transition beginning in Armenia, is that in these past 25 or 26 years, the democracy in Chile has blossomed, but it is still not complete. There's still holes left by that old constitution that continues to be reformed. And I think the point that I want to make, that went fast, the point that I want to make is that all of those changes to perfect the democracy, and it's not perfect by any means, has come from below. It's come because there's been a continuous, massive civil society and social movement that can still bring several 100,000 people into the streets in Chile and pressure the government. And even though the government is fiercely rooted in the anti-dictatorial forces, even though the current president is a woman who had been tortured by the military and her father had been killed by the military, the government still needs to be pushed to fill these democratic holes. And that would be my finishing thought, that if you don't have pressure from the bottom for democratic change, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. Let me turn next, and I may be changing the order here. If I'm crossing you up, panelists, I apologize. But to my colleague in international relations, Professor Brett Carter, again, specialist on the politics of change and democratization, or lack thereof, in Africa. Brett.
Sure. So, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here today. My charge is straightforward. I've been told to sort of summarize the preceding 60 years of 54 countries in 4 minutes. So brace yourselves. I'll do the very best that I can. If there's any aspect to which I don't arrive, perhaps a Q&A or in the reception. So there's a sense that the African continent is rising, right? Its rise has been announced in the pages of The Economist, The Washington Post, by the IMF, by the World Bank. And without any question, certain parts of the continent are. I think Ghana, I think Senegal, countries where elections are increasingly democratic, middle classes are expanding, levels of inequality are declining. They're leading the technology revolution in Africa. For instance, mobile money is a technology in which Africa is really leading the world, essentially thanks to the innovation in Ghana, Senegal, and Kenya, Zambia, et cetera. But there's another side of the continent that increasingly is reeling. Think places like the Republic of Congo, Gabon, Angola, Equatorial Guinea. There are others, of course, we can talk about. In these places, there's still massive government corruption. Elections are consistently fraudulent, quite blatantly. Living standards have remained persistently poor for the vast share of the population. And with the balance of my time, I'd like to tell you a bit about how social media has been harnessed in these sorts of countries to expose electoral fraud and really to begin to organize for change. In particular, I'd like to talk about Gabon. The most recent election was in August of 2016. It was a presidential election. Now, the key thing to know about Gabon is that the same family has been in power since 1967. The Bongo family, Omar Bongo, took power in 1967. The father, his son, stood for re-election in August. Now, Gabon has 9 provinces, and on the night of the election, the day after the election, the first 8 provinces came in. Unsurprisingly, the opposition candidate, Jean Ping, the former head of the African Union, was leading in all 8 provinces, had accumulated a vote margin of about 60,000 votes. Of course, the province that had yet to be counted, or at least released, was the Bongo family native region. Whenever the votes came in for that region, the government claimed, I think, a turnout of 99%, with 95% voting for the incumbent candidate, Ali Ben Bongo. It was sort of blatantly fraudulent. The opposition calls the Bongo family sort of native region the variable of adjustment, right? The variable that the government can sort of adjust based on its electoral needs. Anyway, so after Bongo had been declared the victor, citizens were frustrated, took to the streets. There were protests across Libreville, the capital, Port-Gentil, the commercial capital. Thousands of citizens came in. Back up a few years, the government knew that this would happen, and so sponsored the 2017 African Cup of Nations soccer tournament, which is the marquee soccer event. It's going on now. The opposition saw an opportunity. The opposition decided that if they could just engineer a mass boycott, right, the world's TV cameras would capture the empty stadiums and would then be forced to report on the allegations of vote fraud, on the 50 years of Bongo family rule. It turned out that the boycott was massively successful. The stadiums have been filled to about 10-20% of capacity. Citizens inside the country have played a central role in broadcasting these images really across the world, which then citizens of the diaspora have picked up, have broadcast on their social media platforms. It's been covered again in the USA Today, the New York Times. The boycott has been so successful, and the social media campaign has been so successful that even a group of hackers sort of took down the African Cup tournament website and the website of its central sponsor, the Total Oil Company, which is thought to be kind of at the core of corruption in Central Africa. Anyway, which is all to say that who knows whether or not this social media campaign, the attendant embarrassment of the Bongo government, will generate change in Gabon. The next elections are in 2023, a long time from now. But there's certainly an increase of awareness across the world at what's happened over the past 50 years. With that. Thank you, Brett. Of course.
Let me turn directly to Hisham Abdel-Rahman. Elections, electioneering, and strategic voting.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. On the opposite of those 2 scenarios here, Canada, of course, is a great democracy. We have, elections every 4 years, and at least, and it is, and it's free election, and everybody is happy, and there is nobody need to fear going to the voting station or anything. But we had different problems as of late that actually need grassroots addressing because nobody else was willing to work with it. And the problem in Canada started in 2003. The Canadian political landscape was pretty much balanced. We have 2 parties on the right, and we have 3 different parties on the left. And the election was kind of like more or less reflecting people's wills. Until in 2003, we have a merger on the right, where the 2 parties on the right merged and created the Conservative Party of Canada. And since then, there was kind of like more or less a structural advantage to the right. The voting system is It's called first past the post. And just here, like in the United States, and what it allows the candidate with the most number of votes actually wins the election. They really don't need to get any majority, just need to get to be the most votes within an electoral district. Now with the right organized under one banner, and we have the left divided between three different parties, we end up with, in 2000, we have elections in 2008, 2006, 2008, and 2011, where the Conservative Party of Canada was winning the election with 37% of the vote. No more, no less. 37% of the vote, kind of like the base, the conservative base in Canada. And the three different parties on the left, progressive parties, were actually sharing 63% of the vote, but losing the election. It was actually amazing that, that the division on the left is kind of more or less paralyzed the country. Like people, majority of people are pretty much go to vote and cast a ballot. 63% of them choose a progressive candidate, and their member of parliament end up to be a conservative guy. So after the 2006 election, it was very clear that as long as the conservatives are going to keep those 37% voting for them, we are not going to see any progressive government in the country. The left is divided, and the conservatives have the pretty much very solid 33% of the vote. Just to give you an example, one just typical riding will have typical electoral district will have 37% voting conservative, 35% voting liberal, which is a major progressive party. 25% will be voting NDP, which is the second most, choice for progressives in Canada, and then 3% will be voting Green, the third party on the left. And at the end, those three parties gather the 63%, but then the seat goes to the conservative because of the first past the post. So it was very clear that with vote splitting between those three different parties, we are going to actually keep living with conservative government that actually doesn't represent the Canadian, general Canadian mood. It pretty much represents those 37%, and the other 63% have no saying in how the government actually works. So I started a website in 2008 to just start calculating the numbers about going through every single electoral district and see where we have actually a majority of voters who actually voted for progressive candidate, and they end up with a conservative candidate. In 2008 election, I have the website up and running, and then we have 2011 election, but it actually did not catch until 2015. 2015, people catch actually to the idea through social media. There was pretty much no advertising. There is no actually funds around the whole thing, just social media. People talk to people on social media, and we actually accomplished the change in 2015 when we elected a liberal government. So with the three consecutive elections, winning by conservative, and the liberal pretty much frustrated, there was always a feeling that something has to give. And myself, I was actually fearing more of a consolidation on the left, fearing that we're going to lose three different parties on the left. We end up with one party on the left, and then we lose the diversity of voices on the left. That I actually started a strategic voting campaign to say we need the three different parties. We need them, but we need to actually vote smarter. So we told people pretty much is that when a politician sit down to write their own political platform and their positions, what they do actually, they calculate how the best to win an election. They don't really think with their hearts and whatnot, but then they come to us as voters and tell us, you have to vote your guts. You have to vote from your heart. So when I created the website, I have few different principles that I need to keep. And those principles were very simple. First of all, that we all progressive have to agree on the goal. So if the goal is to replace the first past the post 150 years old political voting system in Canada, so we have to agree on this, and we can all agree on it. So we have to first to find the goal that governs us all. Like in Armenia, the goal might be removing the deep state, the oligarchy. Just get them out. Anybody will be better than them, for example. Second thing, have a platform there so people actually can use the platform to when they are ready. You don't know when people actually are ready to do the change, but what you need to have a platform out there. It took us in Canada 7 years, might took less or more in anywhere else, yes. But you have to have the platform there for people actually to use it. Third thing is that you need to come up from, you are not actually benefiting from any special party winning or not, so you have to be neutral. You can't show up that you actually trying to play somebody else's game. So you have to gain people's trust, and this is the first way to gain trust is to be neutral and to be also transparent. The second thing is that when you are trying to reach people, don't make it so complicated. Don't make it so complicated. Make it a very, very simple thing that everybody can understand. And that's pretty much what we did. Thank you so much. Thanks, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, from National Democratic Institute and also Transparency International, the anti-corruption organization, Marc Mullen, and the lessons of the Republic of Georgia.
Thank you. I'll speak about Georgia first 15 years ago when it was among the most corrupt countries in the world. Transparency International ranks those countries, and it was quite close to the bottom of the list. For those of you who've had dealings with Georgians, you know that the Georgians are a very proud people, and I remember in those days talking to them, saying, have you ever been to Nigeria? Because it's, they're pretty talented at corruption there, and Georgians would say, no, we really know how to do the corruption there. It was a strange conversation, but it really was an illustration of what a dark, sad time it was there. That was something that the Georgians were proud of. But relatively soon after that, from a period where everybody at that time, tended to feel like, well, this is kind of the way it is. This is what we're stuck with. Things changed there to the degree that now Georgia has boring elections, which is one of the most important signs of democracy, that nobody covers them and not very much happens, which is a goal that I'm amazed Georgia has been able to achieve. And so I'll just talk a little bit about how that happened at that time. I think the first thing was there was sort of a long-term plan. People didn't say that it has to happen immediately or this or that the organizing around it took years. And there were people that were involved inside and outside of the country that were ready to be patient, but also to be relentless in their pursuit of change there. It was mostly young people, not entirely, but mostly people in their 20s and 30s that were the engine of change. But they involved everybody, again, inside and outside the country, and I think very, very importantly, urban and rural people. At least in Georgia, there's quite a divide between the capital and people who live in villages. A lot of times people in the capital look down on people in villages, and it's extremely dangerous for democracy in a case like this, and not just in Georgia, Armenia, but in other countries as well. And that, I think the people supporting change realized that needed not to be the case, and that everybody needed to be involved, of every age, national minorities, people in villages and in cities, people in the tougher neighborhoods and cities and the most educated people in those cities. It was very much person to person, and I think that that was intimately connected to the commitment to nonviolence, that people who were with the police, who worked for the army, who worked for ministries, who worked in political positions, their friends and relatives would talk to them about their jobs, about what they were doing, what they needed to keep their jobs, how that related to change, to democracy, to fairness, to the rule of law, and it was done, I would say, in an organized but in an informal way, and over a long period of time. It was quite coordinated between the media, but really just sort of communications in general. At that time, social media was nowhere near as powerful as it is now. But what broadcast media there was that the opposition had influence in, as well as political parties, and also NGOs and nonprofits, and that those groups, they were not the same people, but they communicated quite a bit about what was happening during that period and over a long period of time. They really focused on elections, and elections were used as and not just the view wasn't that we have to win the elections, otherwise we failed, but that elections are a very important organizing event to illustrate to the whole nation what the government is like. So there's two choices. Either we win and there's a change in power and the authority, or we're going to make sure that the population uses this, we use this election for the population to see what's really happening in this country, and to embarrass the authorities as effectively and as painfully for the authorities as possible. There was a great deal of scenario planning about, if this happens, what will we do? There was a lot of strategizing in all different sectors and parts of the country, a lot of training, and I'd say a lot of international involvement from, at that time, especially Serbia and Slovakia, who'd gone through recent changes, and lessons learned from that. I think most of all, the thing that made the difference in Georgia was the unity of the people, which had long been, historically, for centuries, had been a problem in Georgia. And in this particular moment, people very much came together, and the way they came together, and it's difficult to describe, but a lot of it had to do with listening. That people within Georgia listened to people outside of Georgia, expatriates that were living in Georgia, but also Georgians that were living outside but still very much cared about their homeland. But at the same time, it was very important that expatriate Georgians, whether they lived in the United States or the hundreds of thousands that live in Russia, they listened to people within Georgia about their priorities and what they cared about. And so I think, looking at the 90s, one of the big changes moving into the 2000s was a willingness for all sides to listen to each other, which is what I think created the unity that created the changes in what became known as the Rose Revolution.
Marc, thank you. Thank you very much. At this point, we have three others joining the conversation. If I could ask our technical people to connect us now. Here we go. With three, and there they went, three experts on and engaged in one fashion or another Armenian politics. From the left, Vahe Grigoryan, who joins us from London. Irina Ghaplanyan, who is in Armenia, yes. I've got that right. At this time, and Anna Ohanyan, who joins us from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'd love to say a bit more about each of your expertise background, but the audience has it in the program and time is so short that I'd like to turn to each of you. My order says start with Anna and ask you likewise, just speak for a few minutes, commenting on what you've heard or what you can bring us from Armenia today, politics in Armenia today as we move towards these crucial elections.
Very good. Thank you very much to organizers for this very important event. What I would like to do, I would like to contribute to the discussion by zooming out, actually, out of Armenia, by looking at the geostrategic importance of electoral integrity for Armenia for the following reason. Very often, when the issue of democratization comes up, especially in the context of Armenia, the issue of security emerges very quickly. The discussion becomes reduced to a choice, borders versus ballots, security versus democracy. What I would argue that it is a false choice and that the integrity of the ballot is critical for strengthening Armenia's democratic credentials as well as its security. Let me focus on some of the implications as to what happens, actually what the reality is in respect to the persistent problem of electoral fraud and the challenge of building electoral, working functional electoral systems, which we're learning from the other panelists. This has been a challenge around the world and that it is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. So the breakdown, one of the immediate implications of electoral fraud is the breakdown of trust between the government and the society. And it's an argument that our artists on the panel have been very vocal and articulate about it, have been talking and discussing. But equally important problem that does not get as much attention, I think, that actually is very worrisome, is that the lack of electoral integrity has produced a breakdown of trust in democracy, in electoral politics in general, among the people. According to Caucasus Research Resource Center, in 2011, 57% of respondents in Armenia thought democracy is preferable to any other form of government. In 2015, that number dropped to 35%. Importantly, the number of people agreeing that people should participate in protest actions against the government in Armenia increased from 26% in 2011 to 26% in 2011 to 46% in 2015, which is an alarming trend. So the lack of trust translates in drop of civic engagement, in political engagement, immigration, produces domestic instability, questions concerning the defense policies, military service, to name a few. Another issue to consider on this point about the debate, borders versus ballots, security versus democracy, is that domestically elections and electoral integrity has enormous geostrategic consequences for Armenia, as well as any other small states that are sort of in the margins of big, greater regional powers such as Russia. In addition to the exciting trends towards democratization that we heard around the world, that we heard from our previous panelists, in Eurasia, actually worldwide, the parallel trend has been of democratic decline. Over the past 2 decades, there has been democratic declines in about 15 countries, and I might be getting my numbers a little bit off, but there has been a trend of democratic decline. The parallel trend, and this is somewhat different from the democratic decline, is the rise in authoritarian resurgence. While on the one hand, the world has been experiencing waves towards democracy, I would argue that in Armenia, we should not assume that democracy is destiny, that sooner or later Armenia will land in that right side of the history. authoritarian resurgence, and is largely promoted and exported Russia, in particular, and Russia is increasingly assertive in not only creating regional groupings that validate and legitimize semi-authoritarian, semi-democratic hybrid regimes in its neighborhood, from South Caucasus to Central Asia. It has taken the form of sending electoral monitors to validate fraudulent elections in Central Asia, for example, as well as in South Caucasus, as well as in Armenia. And Russia has been quite aggressive in really promoting those practices. NGO regulations inside Russia has been a trend, quite worrisome. So the domestically electoral integrity for Armenia is a strategically critical, because it creates, number one, it diversifies the infrastructure of election monitoring in Armenia, in addition to the Western observers that arrive, the Russian observers that might be there. Having diaspora presence along with Armenians, along with local activists, is an enormous resource. So in respect to the role of election monitoring and electoral integrity and state building, as panelists mentioned, elections ultimately are an organizing tool, and as such, they're a state building tool. Well, for Armenia, state building right now is happening in an increasingly globalized age. We tend to think of state building mostly as democracy in development, but there should be, and there is already, the third dimension of state building, which is diaspora. So I like to think of Armenia's challenge for state building as a 3D approach: democracy, development, and diaspora strategizing. Economically, Armenia seems to have figured it out how to, well, somewhat figured out how to integrate diaspora forces, economic actors, with actually quite mixed successes, but this strategy has been advocated for around the world. This is actually trend for lesser developing countries, low and middle income countries such as Argentina, South Africa, Jamaica, El Salvador. So the reliance on diaspora as an instrument of economic development is also advocated for New Zealand, Japan, Australia, Israel, you name it. Without having political presence of diaspora groups and individuals, that would be very difficult to really integrate economically all of these forces. And to sum up, 80% of elections worldwide are now monitored. This is the international norms. My time is up, and I simply would like to conclude by saying that integrating diaspora, welcoming diaspora as election observers is one of the many steps of meaningful engagement, political engagement of diaspora Armenians outside of Armenia in Armenia's political development that is linked to its economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And now if I could turn directly to Irina, the view from Yerevan, your response to all that you've heard so far. Irina.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the panelists and all the present. Thank you, Anna, for a brilliant introduction, zooming out of Armenia, and let me take it from there and zoom in and discuss a few points that our panelists already touched upon and give a little bit of insider view on the issues that we just discussed in various countries around the world. So I wanted to also take up on what Anna said about the interconnection between security and elections. Unfortunately, this has been from the inception of Armenia's independence. We started our independence with military hostility with our neighbors. And there was a significant gap of meaning creation in our country. throughout the 90s and even 2000s, military discourse, political narrative was nationalism was very predominant. So throughout the period of 25 years, we lacked, on behalf of our political leadership, true meaning creation, which had resulted in civil society not consolidating, not becoming strong. And like Marc talked about Georgia, you know, this was only beginning of 2000s when it was one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and then a massive leap forward. So what was that breaking point that led to such a massive success? And there are a number of issues, but first of all, like Marc Cooper said, that in Chile we have, there was a process of bottom up. In Armenia, over the past 2 decades, we've seen that we need processes from both ways. It's a two-way street. Yes, we need a strong civil society, but we also need a strong political leadership. And over the course of 20 plus years, we've seen weak political opposition. And why has this been the case? So taking up on the problem of meaning creation, which has led to weak civil society and lack of awareness about the significance of political institutions and electoral institution in the country, there has also been a nexus of politics and business, which created oligarchies in the country. That has led to a massive socioeconomic gap and further alienation of the society. So when we look at demographics and the migration trends in the country, we see that it's not only now the lower income families and lower income people that migrate from Armenia in search of jobs, but also middle class families as well. So there has been this powerful alienation with the growth of with the nexus of politics and business, which has led to an increased gap between our political leadership and our civil society. And one of the biggest problems we see as political scientists and analysts here in Armenia in terms of lack of consolidation of civil society is that very two-way street where political leadership with time is becoming more and more disconnected with the reality on the ground, with increased poverty, increased unemployment rates, etc. So meaning creation, civil society, and back to geopolitics again, to the situation of war and security in the country. What we constantly see is the usage of the narrative that, as Anna said, ballot versus border, and it's been recurring, especially during the election period, saying that we cannot afford to have any instability in the country because we are technically at war. We have hostile neighbors. And there's so much to talk about Armenia because I'm here and on a daily basis we confront various issues, and we are facing elections in April. But just to take up on the main topic of discussion and the way we see engagement of diaspora, as Anna said, we need more engagement of those Armenians that are abroad and see what resources we can have in order to A, strengthen the civil society, empower it to be more engaged in the electoral processes, and B, how do we create a stronger political opposition that can garner votes as opposed to the current situation where the party in power, which is the Republican Party, is very strong. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
And joining us from London, Vahe Grigoryan.
Thank you very much for allowing this talk to happen, and many thanks to the panelists who excellently explained the situation in various parts of the world, and also Irina and Anna, who basically released me of most part of my text to say very insightful presentations. So I can now focus on a very technical thing, quite a boring thing, which is, so what was the scheme of electoral fraud, which almost 2 decades made Armenia to made Armenian people almost disabled people to elect its government. So, as you know, from 2002, an interesting rule has been imported into Armenian law, which was about secrecy of voters lists. So this was not something novel. This was not a novel story in the world, in the electoral law of many jurisdictions. But for Armenia, its consequences were devastating, and the reason was Armenia's specifics. As you know, almost 40%, according to very balanced statistics, of voters of Armenia since beginning of 2000s lived outside of Armenia. So secrecy of voters list did not practically allow anyone to supervise over the correctness of figures of participation. So the figures of participation, I'm speaking about figures and facts, and I'm speaking about very technical things. But I think these technical things are worth to understand and bear in mind when we are speaking about electoral process, especially participation of diaspora to that process, and especially ascertaining in which stages of this process it is expected that diaspora will be more effective in. So the secrecy of this voters list allowed the power of the day almost on the scale from 300 to 450,000 votes add on to the list of the votes for them, which practically means, in terms and figures of Armenian electoral statistics, that there is no practical possibility to change the government, because any party having whole administrative resource, which will add these figures to their ballots, will be almost the winning party or winning political winning candidate in presidential elections. So up until 2016, this was a matter of law, that the secrecy of voters list was maintained in Armenian electoral law. In 2016, the opposition, with technical assistance of some NGOs, negotiated a new amendment to electoral code. This is very important to take into account, especially when we're speaking about participation in upcoming elections. Negotiated a new amendment to electoral code by which the voters list will be published within 12 hours closing of polling stations. This is an enormous step forward, but step forward in order to estimate the real number of participation in elections. I wouldn't say that this will allow, in an absolute terms, to estimate fix the real numbers of participation, but in a way, this is the major. This was the major obstacle. Secrecy of voters list was the major obstacle that did not allow that to happen. It may seem very illogical that the party in power, Republican Party, left this strong tool to opposition of civil society. This does not mean that the Republican Party is, my understanding of the situation is, this does not mean that the government and political and Republican Party aim at having free and fair elections in terms of to leave the people to elect its government. This happened merely because of a very simple reason. As you know, in 2015, the Armenian new amendments to Armenian constitution were adopted, at least officially, in a referendum, according to which, in order to have 50+1 in the parliament, so to be a majority in the parliament, the political party or an alliance does not need to have 50+1 votes in the elections, but merely be the one in the elections, which is the major reason that they left this. To wrap up this short presentation, I want to say that it is not expected that Republican Party will leave its power during next elections. But what can be done, which is very, very useful in order to build the long-term strategy of democratization of Armenia, is it's the first time that the participation numbers will be estimated close to reality. And so the second stage will be already to fight against the so-called bonus model of composition of power in Armenia, which I hope there will be time to speak about.
Thank you.
So this is all.
So now we have a sadly brief period for some discussion among the panelists here and joining us remotely. And I'm supposed to moderate. I was actually supposed to fill in if there was any dead time. I think there's little likelihood of that. Let me just kick us off, and people raise their hand, both abroad and right here in my presence. But I want to kick us off with just one kind of complicated question, which is assuming that the questions that Vahe, Hisham have raised and others about the actual voting, balloting, uniting around opposition candidates and not fragmenting. If all this goes as smoothly as possible, and there's a clear vote for reform, for change, what comes next? Do you have high hopes for a gradual move towards a reform government and better politics? Or is it more likely, as has been seen in Georgia with the Rose Revolution and repeatedly in Ukraine and elsewhere, that there is a refusal to leave government or to recognize the results? We have large demonstrations, protests, nonviolent, but they can become violent, depending on the actions of the protesters or the regime. How is change most likely going to come to Armenia, given, again, this comparative perspective? That's just what I want to say to kick us off. Please, those respond to that or anything else each of you have heard. And I'll just take Marc. I see your hand first. Marc Cooper.
I don't know that I have much authority to speak on Armenia. Though I was there for a month, just a month ago, so I got sort of an immersive education. I don't think you have to look, to answer your question, I don't think you have to know much about Armenia, because all you have to do is look at the United States today. So we have 200 and some odd years of constitutional democracy, but we see that we cannot trust any government, in specific this government, this administration, to be fully democratic unless there are people at the airport today, okay? So I don't claim to know the minds very well of the Republican Party, but as Irina said, it is a two-way street for sure. You need the pressure from the bottom, and you need the leadership from the top. But that's not an equal equation. You need both. But if you don't have that pressure from the bottom, even if the technical voting, especially in a place like Armenia, is improved in this coming election and going forward, that's not enough, nearly of a guarantee of a vivid, secure democracy. You need people to be engaged. They are the ultimate check.
Again, all panelists, give me a signal if you want to comment. I've got Marc, and then I think Anna. Brief everyone, just a minute so we can get a lot in.
I just wanted to say that, especially with the activist from London who was talking about some of the details of the election observation effort, that the details are very, very important. Having an enormous and well-organized election observation effort is crucial, because the tricks that are used, there are many of them. They're all used in different places. What happened in the 99 and the 2001 and the 2003 election in Georgia was exactly what happened Bongo's elections before in terms of holding one district in order to take by a little bit the other. People talk about parallel vote tabulations, which are very important, which is a technical way to find out what the results would have been if the government had not cheated, and those are very important. But particularly if there's a massive civic effort to increase turnout, a parallel turnout tabulation is also important to keep the government from stuffing the ballot boxes or cheating later on at higher levels of the Electoral Commission. And my impression is that in this election, there's enough of a focus on election observation itself and the details, particularly involving the diaspora, which is really, really important because of the expertise around the world that Armenia has. Keep in mind that Armenia is one of the most educated countries in the world, has an enormous advantage. The fact that this number of people could come in this auditorium to discuss these issues is something that not every country in the world has the advantage of. And so, so focusing that on the details of election observation and turnout observation is very, very important. So I really, really agree with that.
Yes, I have Anna next. Anna, if you will. Anna,
Hello?
yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So two very quick points to a very big and indeed complex problem as to what would change look like in Armenia, what would reform look like in Armenia. I would highlight that it's important to manage expectations. Very often when I hear people talking about this, they tend to tie the success of monitoring to whether or not there will be a change in power. I would argue that it's a very much a process and a long-term process. So the diaspora should should set an objective of building networks, partnerships for a long haul, that it is not just about these elections, or regardless of the outcomes, that I'm hoping that any election monitoring from diaspora will be first of many. In electoral fraud, obviously, is a broader problem. It's not just ballot stuffing, but it's the reliance of administrative resources of the state, including the educational sector, public educational sector that I've witnessed being deployed for this purpose. And number two, and linking to Marc Cooper's point and to what Irina also said, the top down and bottom up, but the grassroots absolutely very important. But I would like to add that three dimension, grassroots and global. Diaspora presence as a global, but also local organization working hand in hand with local Armenians, I would highlight as a key. My limited knowledge of Latin America, I keep thinking about Latin America in thinking about the role of non-state actors, social movements, global social movements from United States working with social movements in Latin America that helped to sustain and promote democratization processes. So it'd be interesting to hear as to what extent, for example, that has been a case for Chile, whether external global actors partnered with local actors. But these are my 2 cents on this, and I hope you could hear me well, because I think I lost you on your end.
Okay, let me go to Brett Carter first, and then Irina. Brett.
Yeah, so I completely agree about the relevance of pressure from below, right? That's just been a critical part of sort of every liberalization effort that regimes have been forced to concede in sub-Saharan Africa over the past few years. What I would add is that planning is a really critical part of that. I believe, Marc, you mentioned the role of sort of elite defections, right? Sort of targeting people, who are in some sense, who would be pulling the trigger of the regime security services. That's critical, right? I mean, being willing to bring the country to a standstill, that's critical. Both of these are exceedingly dangerous tasks, right? And so one of the techniques that has kind of proven particularly useful in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm not sure to what extent this would be possible now, but using foreign embassies as potential refuges if things do go wrong, right? I mean, it's having sort of these sorts of if-then type statements has proven to be just really, really critical. The one other thing that I would say is these are certainly sort of long-term processes, and every election is in some sense sort of a new opportunity for citizens to organize, right? And sort of that kind of repeated, sustained pressure over the course of 5, 10, 15 years, I think is not to be understated, right? So even if there's not immediate change, it's not as though that the organization this time around wasn't useful, right? I mean, in some sense, you can think of that as kind of planting the seeds for even sort of larger, more consequential motivation the next time around.
Irina? Go ahead, Irina, yes. Oh. Irina, we're not hearing you. Could you start over?
Sure. Can
there
you
we
hear
are.
me now?
Go ahead. Yes, good, good, good.
I just wanted to very quickly add a couple of points regarding challenges of the upcoming elections. First of all, historically, data shows that in Armenia, politics has been very personality-driven, partly because of the lack of ideologies, partly because of lack of strong political parties, etc. But it's been very personality-driven, and now as we're entering officially a period of becoming a parliamentary republic, there is a fear among experts that the engagement of the population in these elections would be lower because this time around it's political parties as opposed to individuals. And this has been the case also with presidential elections. We've had higher turnouts than with parliamentary elections in the past 2 decades. So that's one of the challenges we're facing in April. Another big challenge is the fact that a lot of election fraud occurs before the actual election. And that has to do with vote buying and voter intimidation. As I referred to party in power, Marc would also attest to the fact that Georgia, prior to the massive reforms undertaken by Saakashvili, had one of the largest public sectors on the post-Soviet space. Armenia remains to be one of those countries. We have a huge public service, and traditionally, they vote for the party of power. So there is voter intimidation, there's voter buying, so there's a lot of challenges that are in the way towards the elections in April. And also there is April itself that's a challenge, because if you recall, a year ago we had military confrontation with Azerbaijan. We had over 100 deaths of Armenian soldiers, and to Armenians it's an important day, and serendipitously or intentionally, the date of election is set for April 2nd, when the day we lost majority of our soldiers. So there is now also talk in the society that we are going to boycott the elections. So now we have all of these various challenges that we need to figure out how are we going to tackle them in order to ensure higher turnout and participation of the civil society.
Thank you. Hisham, very briefly, we've got to keep these short.
So to empower the population to grow the movement from the bottom pretty much, you have to create those tools that the population actually can use. It is up to civil society, it is up to the intelligentsia to actually help create those tools for the people to use. People are not going to invent those tools, but they need to be invented for them so they can use them when they are ready to do the change. Without creating those basic platforms and basic tools that people are going to use when they need them, there are not going to be any motivation for people to move. When the opposition is spread between 5, 6, 7 different parties, you end up people actually staying home, nobody cares, nobody willing to make a stand. So it is up to the intellectuals and up to the major civil society organization to actually concentrate and focus people on what they want to do and make it as clear as much as they can. So actually all the effort go into one direction and doesn't get split. The election in Armenia has 5% threshold, which pretty much is going to benefit the Republican unless the opposition actually can concentrate in one major opposition party to direct the opposition to the Republicans.
Thank you. If I could interject another maybe provocative comment, and again, maybe this will bring us towards the end. I think Irina mentioned more directly than others the role of Russia. We know that Russia has enormous security importance for Armenia, that it has a kind of near complete economic dominance to the point where Armenia could be argued is not even a fully sovereign state, residing where it does in that part of the world. And Russia has a well-known neuralgia, a great fear on the part, in particular, of its current leader for spontaneous democratic movements on its borders. So I guess it's just to ask the question to anyone who would want to answer, maybe Marc, others who've seen the colored revolutions up close, how is that to be managed without causing problems with Russia, in particular because we seem to have a new American administration, probably less concerned about promoting democracy and probably a little more accommodating of Russia. How does that factor have to be managed in this election and going forward?
I can talk about how it was in that period, and it was difficult because what the tactics that Russia was using then and use even more now is to treat their neighbors in such a way that's so enraging that it makes it impossible to do anything else. What they're doing now, for example, in South Ossetia is just moving the administrative boundary line. You know, they just move the fence a few hundred meters here and there. And it's so frustrating of course, for the people who live near there, but also constantly on the news in Georgia, you'll see that, that it can take away from other efforts. And it was the same, although not quite as bad in 2001, 2, and 3, at a time at which there were actual Russian military bases in Georgia. And so I think what was done at that time was to just say we're gonna leave this to the side right now and concentrate on what we have control over, which is our own government. That is similar in a lot of ways to the tactics of the Trump government, which is a flurry of tweets and executive orders that make it difficult to concentrate on actual changes that are going on right now. And I think that there are lessons to be learned for Americans from this as well.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to ask us to pause for a moment, thank our panelists, and ask them to exit the stage. It's been splendid. And we're moving directly to the next phase of our discussion, and we'll be joined by our celebrity diplomats, if you will, Justice for Armenia. Let me just give you their names, you have them on the program, and invite out Arsinee Khanjian, she'll be coming shortly. Again, you have the biographies if you don't know them already in your program. Arsinee Khanjian, Atom Egoyan, and Vahe Berberian. I think we are also going to lose Vahe, Irina, and Anna temporarily, and we're joined by Serj Tankian. Here we are. And Eric Nazarian. So thanks for your patience as we rearrange the furniture and get our new set of panelists out here or hooked up by a remote feed. My program said I'm supposed to fill a minute or two here while people move, simply by moderating, by provoking discussion, raising some issues. I don't know how I could go further or do better than what we just heard. But naturally now we are moving to the phase of discussion where we directly engage the contributions of the role of the diaspora in Armenian politics, both immediately, right, in the upcoming elections in April, so important, monitoring, pressuring, contributing, but then, of course, beyond that as well, the larger role of the diaspora in the Republic of Armenia today. So I see we have our remote panelists. Okay, both Serj and Eric are connected. Are our celebrity diplomats ready? Again, Arsinee Khanjian, Atom Egoyan, and Vahe Berberian. I know they're here, so they'll be out shortly. Here we are. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Probably I'm responsible for not giving the right signal and causing them to scramble, but we're all here now. And again, as with the previous panel, let me just turn. My order says Arsinee will begin, and then we'll just move in the order as you see on the stage. With your thoughts, your comments on what you've seen and what's important to you for Armenia going forward.
First of all, thank you for the audience for being here in such a big number. I have to say, since my involvement in July in these matters of connection with Armenia, not that that connection is new. I have always had as an Armenian relationship with Armenia, but the sense of responsibility probably was triggered by the incidents that most of us are probably aware of in terms of the July and even earlier situation of the war in April in Armenia. I think we got a different sense of understanding of the things that have been going wrong in Armenia. So thank you for being here. This is a big audience for that. It hasn't been so until now in terms of my own experience speaking out. So what is going on in Armenia is nothing new. I think Irina sort of brought it up in an interesting way. I think from the day of independence, Armenia has been forming its social and political sort of identity on shaky grounds, and that the geopolitical environment gave us all, diaspora and Armenia, a sense of belief that security being the most important issue for the country, that we should create the status quo and stick to it. Except that status quo is the biggest danger today as we speak for Armenia, and not necessarily the arguments that have been presented and have been partly right until now in terms of unfriendly neighbors and so on. I think what is really important in this conversation is the relationship between two civil societies, and I don't know if it's an accurate academically sort of definition, but there is such a thing as a civil society in Armenia. We know that. However outspoken they have been able to be, or they have had the chance to be, and there is a civil society in the diaspora. And this connection has not until now worked out in any significant way. And maybe 25 years later of independence that we have been proudly celebrating as Armenians around the world, this is the time to understand that to support a state also means to support a civil society, the people. We have not heard from the people of Armenia over the last 25 years. We have heard from the different governments, authorities that have represented or tried to represent that voice, but we know that that connection is not there. I am speaking in terms of my own experience, something that inadvertently sort of I felt that I'm responsible of, other than interested in, when I have been asked, literally asked in the streets, in places where I would be in Yerevan, or in Armenia in that matter, that the diaspora takes on the responsibility of backing all the efforts that the civil society in the country is trying to put in place. The efforts and the will for it are very diverse, very shaky, very complicated, very complex. But the most important thing is that there is still a little bit of hope that something can be changed, but that change can only happen with our involvement, our engagement. So to all of these people who ask me, or they say, but why would you're a diasporan Armenian, you're not an Armenian citizen, why would you be getting involved in that? I would like to answer today that in this global age, we are responsible of anything that happens around the world to children, to women, to societies that are under dictatorships. We have the voices of expressing our opinions. We have the responsibility we feel as part of this global village, if I may kind of use that sort of funny expression. But we all have given ourselves as citizens of Canada, United States, France, Argentina, doesn't matter, to be involved in matters of the world. We do carry that responsibility with ease. How is it that the Armenian diaspora doesn't feel today that we have a say in what's going on in Armenia? The people of Armenia are specifically calling for our input, not our involvement as in dictating what should happen, but our involvement in making them believe that we can be the leverage and the resource to help them understand what are the options that they can actually bring from the bottom up, because this relationship is the one that we have not catered to, and we have to stop in the diaspora to think that the only way is to keep the status quo as it has been through the support of an imagined state that is actually effectively in many of its institutions taken over by a government and oligarchy that is not doing what the people need. And in the face of depopulation, which is the biggest security problem for Armenia today, we cannot today say that we don't have a role to play in terms of providing what they're asking from us, which is support, empowerment. This is all I have to say.
What has happened to us as a diasporan community? I think that there have been different levels of our engagement with celebrity, with the notion of diplomacy through celebrity. At first, we were very happy, and of course, it's timely that Mike Connors died a couple of days ago, because we were all very proud of Mike Connors. He was Armenian. His name was Krikor Ohanyan. We were very proud of Arlene Francis. I'm going back to my childhood. We loved the idea that there are Armenians that had survived, because we are all survivors. We are people who are here because of diaspora. And we allowed ourselves to just be amazed by the fact that we could be successful. But we are so beyond that. And what we have not come to really understand until very recently, shockingly recently, is that our engagement has to go beyond the sense that we are just here, because we are no longer just there. We are seeing massive depopulation, as Arsinee has said. This is a critical juncture. And we have to understand, as was said before, that it's not enough to think that what happens in the election will determine what our engagement means. That is very short-sighted, and we have to manage expectations, as it was said so beautifully. We know, and this is the real crisis, we know what's going to happen with the election. And we should be appalled at what's happening with the election. We should be appalled at the fact that there are people who have political voice who are put in jail. We should be appalled by the fact that there is no legitimate alternative. And that is because it has been suppressed. What's going to happen in the election, we know the result. But what we now have to commit ourselves to is what's going to happen after the election, where we as diasporans will be engaged in this country. We love this country, but it's not just the concept of the country. The second stage of celebrity diplomacy was, of course, Cher, going after the earthquake, or it's Charles Aznavour, or it's System of a Down, or it's these people who talk about issues that we understand and have celebrated and commemorated last year. And the problem that we have to adjust ourselves to is the fact that this is not about genocide anymore. This is about a different type of survivalist threat. And I'm so proud of this association with justice within Armenia, because as artists, we have generated a lot of that feeling of nostalgia, of patriotism, of identity. But now as artists, we are saying the next stage is to do exactly what Arsinee has said and what Arsinee represented that day when she was arrested, which is that let's make this real in terms of our day-to-day existence. Let us make it real that we are participants in this country. And let us heed the call that is being made to us to engage. Let us go there. Let us sit in the streets if we have to. Let us say that we are a part of this. Let us re-engage with this place that we have cut ourselves off from for many different circumstances, not the least of which is our own sense of trying to cope with trauma of coming here in the first place. But now we have to engage at a different level. It's profound, it's deep, and it's amazing that you're all here today. And that's a great step forward. Thank you.
There's this misconception that art and politics have nothing to do with each other, and a few days ago I put a post against Trump on my Facebook, and among many comments, one of them was, "Mr. Berberian, stick to your comedy, forget politics." And I thought, what an amazing piece of advice to a comedian. I just want to say that there are two ways of looking at the diaspora's role in Armenia, in Armenian politics, and what we're doing here. The first one is that the ones sitting here, all of us, none of us are from Armenia, or none of us have immediate stakes in the outcome of the Armenian elections. We live fairly comfortable lives in the diaspora. We're not directly affected by what happens politically in Armenia. Our sons and daughters are not on the front lines. We don't have to bribe officials to get some basic service done. And we're not debased by some thug who works for an oligarch and knows that he's above the law and he can get away with anything. So some of you might think that there is something hypocritical in the whole idea of living in the comfort of diaspora and propagating change in our homeland. However, there's something deeply unsettling and even more hypocritical in playing the aloof bystander, in pretending that we don't care what happens to our fellow Armenians in our fatherland. A country that has all the potentials of becoming a civilized, advanced, warm, and beautiful place. Basically, what we're saying is that in order for people to live a dignified life, it is imperative that they become the masters of their own destiny. And for that, it is essential that people feel free to elect the government they want. We're not here to dictate who to choose to run the government. We just want to assert that they have natural rights and the right to elect a government they think is fair and will not rob them of their dignity.
We have, again, Serj Tankian and Eric Nazarian coming in remotely. Just jump right in. Serj, and then Eric afterward. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. First of all, amazing. I've been following the whole program via live stream, and it's really amazing. And what my compatriots here said, we got together when the Sasnazare events were happening in Armenia. We were all concerned as artist friends, just so we can kind of give a little reference to what we're doing as this association called Justice Within Armenia. We got together and we were all concerned about what was going on, and we were concerned that the level of frustration within Armenia by the people against the injustice within the country domestically was growing to a level that unless we actually participated somehow, that it was, it was going to be problematic. And we all looked toward the parliamentary elections as this is the only way to kind of ease that frustration, ease that pain coming up. I think everyone was on the same plane having to do with that. We're all concerned about bloodshed. We're all concerned about extreme responses within such a vulnerable small republic that we have. So that's why we kind of got together and started talking about this. Playing in Armenia last year at the Centennial with System of a Down and seeing the amazing youth, seeing that amazing hope and energy and future Armenia, what I call. And having done that previously as well, I'm confident that the future of Armenia is extremely bright. I'm confident that these future leaders that I saw in front of me that were rocking out are going to be incredible leaders. The real question is, how do we buy them enough time not to leave the country? That's how I'm looking at things. How do we help with that process of having them be comfortable, having them have opportunity, having them feel the dignity of being part of a civil society, being part of a democratic society. So that's our fight, really, and our tools are, as artists, are to inspire. That a change is possible. Living partially I'm in New Zealand right now, but living partially in the United States, it's pretty effing depressing right now there. And to see there is no such thing as a non-corrupt government. All governments, by definition, are corrupt, as we know. It's just different forms of corruption. In the U.S., we've got the slavery era electoral college matched with K Street lobbying firms and super PACs and super electors and a duopoly of the political organizations. And in Armenia, we have this other post-Soviet structure that has evolved, but remains in this kind of unconditional seeking of power and control in a very uniform type of way. So it's our job to work with civil society in Armenia to try to open up those doors. Managing expectations, as was well said, is important, of course. Our efforts, if we can make a small fraction of a change, along with and when I say we, I mean civil society in Armenia and civil society within the diaspora working together, obviously. If we can make a small fraction of a change over the long run, I think that's very important. Thank you.
Now, Eric, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, everybody at USC Institute of Armenian Studies for putting this together. I've been following it live stream from Amman here. And, from the beginning, I think, we talk about public service, right, as a political role. But the oldest public servants in history, one of the oldest, were the storytellers. And I look at all my friends here and all the professionals here, in one capacity or another, we're all storytellers. And Armenia has a story that's been dying to be told for millennia. And finally, for 25 years, I've witnessed from up front in my student days, through my years as a filmmaker, going back there, step by step, this incredible sense of indifference that kind of blew up in April. And the day that Arsinee was arrested, I was flying into Armenia from Istanbul. Vahe was in Yerevan. And that was really kind of the turning point where I realized there's this incredible bifurcation we have as a diaspora to not get involved, to not want to be stood up and be counted for, and to express solidarity on the most basic level. The problem with Armenia that I've seen for the past 17, 18 years of going back there regularly is we're a small nation that always talks about big ideas, but we still haven't figured out how to address the most minute daily quotidian needs of the population that is less than 3 million. And so whatever's been happening for these 25 years clearly is not working. And we're not out for all-out war or revolution or trying to think we know what we're talking about sitting half a world away in the diaspora. We just want to understand what this existential crisis is between the diaspora and Armenia proper. We want to engage. And I think without that sense of engagement, now more than ever, I left America, just before the last days of Barack Obama. I'm in the Middle East right now. And I can tell you the events that have happened in this last 7 days, the ramifications on the street here is something to be very worried about, because what's going to happen if people do not stand up to oppression, if people do not come together to address their voices. And I think what we're trying to do is try to understand what it is that we can do, all of us collectively, in giving awareness, like Atom said, to be with the people in the street. Because we have come to a point where we've orientalized ourselves. Being Armenian is not about Mount Ararat. It's not about being the first Christians. It's not about these great ideas that we're so proud of, yet we're so deluded by, because we need to step up and really ask ourselves, are we going to stay silent and are we going to live comfortably from afar? Or are we going to engage and genuinely do something that breaks the cancer of apathy and indifference? And the main thing for me, more than anything, because I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East and in Europe these past 7-8 years, I am seeing on the streets of Istanbul and on the streets of Europe and on the streets of the Middle East an incredibly, insanely alarming rate of young and old Armenians that are, as one of them I spoke to in Istanbul, who spoke brilliantly in incredibly erudite and well-learned Armenian. She said, we have become tashkinaks, handkerchiefs. And the biggest fear I have is this incredible youth that we have in Armenia. From Tumo, from Golden Apricot, from all the civil society members, how do we come to a place where we can turn that potential energy and make it kinetic so that these people do not leave the country?
So at this point, thank you. Thank you. At this point, we're going to broaden the conversation again and invite back in Vahe, Irina, and Anna, who've been patiently waiting remotely and haven't had a chance, probably bubbling with ideas. Let me ask you, again, the same rules. Try to keep it to 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll have time for a lot more back and forth with our panelists here. But give us your thoughts, starting with Vahe.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Many thanks to panelists for their presentations. But I would like also, as previous time, to bring it down to parts and figures, what we are speaking about. So when we're speaking about diaspora's engagement in electoral politics in Armenia, and it's very exciting to listen that diaspora themselves want to be engaged in there. But not less important to understand the scopes. So I'm not in a capacity to advise what to do in that sense, although I more now feel myself diasporan than Armenian. But I think there are 2 points, especially 2 points, which I want to make clear that we need to all to understand. Firstly, when we're speaking about engagement in electoral politics, let's speak about elections as 2 aspects of the same process. The first one is content of the process, which is about more the platforms, ideologies, personalities, and the campaign itself engaged. And the second aspect of this business is the process and procedure. My understanding is that however diaspora useful may be in participating and engaging in this process, it is only the second aspect that diaspora may, and I would think that will be fair to be engaged only with. And I don't think that there is any space in first aspect of it, content-wise. So, and process and procedure itself should be understood as quite broadly started from pre-election campaign up to the voting day and appeal process of the results or breaches of law. So, second thing about this, which was very important, I will say, and I'll wrap up my presentation. Second thing about this is to remember that it will be the most effective participation and engagement of diaspora in this process may be only in the case when diaspora's engagement institutionally is not involved for the side and for the part of any political force or alliance in electoral observation mission, be it electoral observation mission or supervision or in the capacity of proxies. Otherwise, being on the side of a political party or a political alliance, I think will be mutually detrimental to the interests and future cooperation in this sphere. So now there are political parties in Armenia. They want to build their capacity to supervise the elections and the voting process through their proxies. On an individual scale, of course, no one may obstacle someone to be engaged as a proxy for a political party or not, although there are some legal restrictions for this also. But institutionally, I think scopes of engagement, scopes of involvement, and also institutional not only understanding the scopes, but also making it clear to the Armenian counterparts is essential for engagement of diaspora. So I would like that these 2 points to be borne in mind when being engaged in electoral process. And when I say electoral process, again, I want to make it clear, it's just the second aspect of electoral process at all, but not the first one, I mean, the content-wise. So this is, to keep the long story short, I would stop there.
Process, and I think it's important that they be expressed. But I also think it's really important to respond to something that's been raised, and Arsinee raised it, and it was raised on a piece of paper that was given to me in a list of questions, is that by no means is anything that we're saying today going to be construed by the current government as a legitimization of its victory on April 2nd. This is absolutely, has to be said emphatically. What has happened is appalling in as much as we do not have a viable alternative yet. We are engaged because we are helping to build this in the future. We are there because, as it was said before, a small incremental change is all we're expecting this spring. But we are in this for the long haul, as we've been in it for a very long haul historically as a nation. And we have to understand that our committee is not going to be used by the current government to legitimize whatever happens on April 2nd. There are far too many people who have a strong voice who are imprisoned. There are far too many people who have a strong opinion who are feeling threatened. We should not feel fear of our own leaders, as simple as that.
Anna, did you want to come in, or Irina with a comment, or are we just going to wait for signals? Go ahead, Anna, then. I'll keep in order.
I'll keep it very, very short, just to highlight, actually pick up on what the speakers have been saying, but just to simply really highlight that word that everyone is using, engagement, and very much in the spirit as to what Adam Egoyan has said, looking beyond the April 2nd, regardless of the outcomes. So it's important to think about political engagement of diaspora in particular, not only as monitors, but also thinking engagement as voting, as advocacy, and enfranchisement of diaspora in general. And here, Armenia, I would argue, is very much behind global trends. the Armenia as a new country is newly discovering, is trying to build its identity with its diaspora. But worldwide, throughout much of 20th century and even now, countries with large diaspora already have created some sort of legislative and constitutional provisions for external voting. I would actually put that on the agenda, that the fact that there are 119 countries worldwide from different continents that have some provision of voting that allow people outside of their home countries to participate. So moving beyond April 2nd, I would really urge everyone to think not only in terms of figuring out a way to link diaspora Armenians, whether it's in advocacy, election monitoring, but also voting and figuring out as to how you partner with civil society. That should change of how diaspora does philanthropic giving. How do you support civil society? So I would just conclude by saying it's not should diaspora be engaged politically, but the question is how, and I'll just end there.
And Irina, you were waiting also, please.
Sure. I'd like to make a few comments taking up on various points that have been raised. Over the course of my research and many interviews I've conducted with political leadership in Armenia, all the three different administrations that were in power, in the political narrative, they would always refer to diaspora being an asset. However, when you observe and analyze the policies that these various political administrations have adopted, they've treated diaspora largely as a liability. And the conclusion is that realizing that it's potentially a powerful asset, they have kept diaspora at bay because of the potential permeability of their power, because of it being a strong asset. So I'm extremely excited to see this initiative coming together, because also as part of my research and extensive interviews that I've conducted with various political leaders in all the three different administrations, they would talk about, and actually the chapter in my book is titled The Nation and the State, A Failed Marriage, where the political leadership would blame diaspora for lack of organization, and the bridges weren't built because diaspora doesn't speak in one voice. So in the sense, I'm very in that sense, I'm very excited to see this initiative come together. And also, I want to put a footnote there that because of such a powerful diversity we have within diaspora, it actually is a huge asset, and we should look beyond the electoral politics. We should look at every possible way diaspora can be engaged. And I just want to add two more points here. We've also been doing research about lack of involvement of women in politics, and our research results came back saying with the following conclusion, that politics in Armenia is largely viewed as a dirty thing, and in our society, women should not be engaged in dirty things, primitively speaking. And there is a sense and lack of true political leadership of integrity. And as Serj said, how do we keep our youth in Armenia? How do we keep them excited about the country? And from my teaching experience, we have incredible young population in Armenia who are seeking leadership with integrity, and we need more people getting engaged in politics, getting engaged in civil society. And here I see engagement of diaspora in various aspects, not just electoral politics. I see the power of the diaspora in its diversity, and not just speaking in one voice as our political leadership would want it to be institutional. So a lot to talk about, but I'll leave it at there.
So if I can just say, I'm very ashamed up here My management has been far too autocratic, and this is all about democratization. This will become a full conversation. Just speak up, please, all of ours, and don't wait for me.
One of the most important things that can be done is to let people, especially the young ones, know that something can change. Because the disillusionment when we were in Armenia, one of the things is that you either don't vote because you know nothing's going to change, or people actually selling their votes for 5,000 dirhams or so. And so the pressure is not just on officials not to buy votes, but on people not to sell their votes. And in order for that to happen, you have to believe in the system. You have to actually participate.
But also for that, you have to create an environment where the people are at least hopeful that through a certain process of engagement, they can be the actors to bring change. And that change is all about hope. I think the big problem of Armenia right now, and I'm not talking about the people who are analyzing, and they are in that privileged environment of understanding how more or less the society is functioning or dysfunctioning. But the people themselves, I think, are at complete loss of this notion of hope for change. So for those who are criticizing the concept of introducing as diaspora's involvement, let's say through these elections, upcoming elections, as a participation, that we're not going to be able to change the system. This is not the point to change the system. This is to give to the people a possibility of belief in themselves that they can bring change over time. As you have heard today, I mean, nowhere in the world change has happened from one moment to the other. Even if there have been revolutions, like full-fledged revolutions, change is still not happening. It doesn't develop right now. But I think it is very important, especially for the young generation, to believe that whatever change happens, that is the thing that is going to bring a new proposition, and they have to work all towards that. If that hope is kind of instigated and supported through our contribution, I think it's the most pragmatic and realistic expectation that we can have towards the upcoming 5 years, at least for Armenia.
I agree that we shouldn't be taking any partisan politics as artists. I actually learned that lesson years ago thanks to Serj Tankian. And as artists, I think it's smarter if we encourage the viability of the democratic process, the civil initiatives, and and just do it in a way where whoever the people are for, we've got your back. I mean, that's what we're trying to say here. We're not, we don't want to be part of any particular political organizations. I think that would dilute our message. I think that would take away the potency of what we're trying to accomplish. I also have a critique of the Armenian diaspora. When we started this initiative, we were a bit disappointed as to the kind of, not necessarily the joining up of people, but the actual educational process and engagement of the people having to do with electoral politics in Armenia, not just electoral politics of Armenia, but anything in Armenia. Armenians in the diaspora, and I always, this is my going critique joke with my friends in Glendale. Glendale people know more about Kobe Bryant, who takes Turkish money from Turkish Airlines, than the Armenian, political landscape. And tell me if I'm wrong. I think there's a problem there. This engagement has to occur. There are many ways to do it. I personally have an Armenian, news website on my homepage so that I can read Armenian news first and then go to BBC or whatever I'm going to. I mean, I think, Armenian organizations and the Armenian diaspora institution is, it will take time, and we see some changes actually developing and seeing that they also feel the need for positive progressive change in Armenia. We are seeing those cracks, but it will take time because they are very specialized in setting up communities and doing all of the things that we do, political specialties within the US, etc., in Europe. Anyway, that's just a critique that I had, that I have been a bit disappointed, but I think it is going to take time for this engagement to properly commence.
Eric.
More than anything, you know, as storytellers, as artists, as people that have been blessed through hard work to be able to give life to stories and to stand for something, you know, for me, you know, it's almost like Armenia's in this half-pregnant stage. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. There's no such a thing as half-pregnant. But that's what Armenia is right now. She's half-pregnant because she's having a very difficult time trying to understand what she wants to be for its people, what she wants to be for the people up north that dictate what she's going to do based on geopolitical gains and needs. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to understand that there's a war between apathy and indifference. Apathy of the youth and the adults that are leaving Armenia, the youth that we're hoping, as Serj said, as so many of my friends said, that we want to help keep and create some type of incentives and incentivize them through presence, if not anything else, but also to really combat and look in our own souls, look in the mirror, and not ask for whom the bell tolls, as John Donne said, because it's tolling for all of us, near or far. There is a threat that we could potentially be in another war very, very soon, at the whim of many, many factors at play that we cannot see. There is a threat that we do not know the truth of what's going on that border. There is a threat that we do not know what happened in that 4-day war. There's a lot of things we don't know. What we do know is that we have a choice if we're going to be indifferent as a diaspora, or if we're going to take a stand, just like we're taking a stand right now for the Syrians and the people that are stuck at the airports. We don't want to be Facebook philosophers. And I think it's important that social media has given us this gift to explode ideas and be aware. What we do need to do is be present, and to be present with the youth, because that is the single most important investment that all of Armenians around the world can do, is empower the youth through inspiration and through hope. And right now, there's not a lot of that in Armenia, because for 25 years, these people have been getting slapped in the face, left, right, and center, and they cannot foresee a future for themselves en masse. I'm not talking about Yerevan, I'm talking about Charentsavan and Hrazdan, and places off the map that you don't go, that you don't see. These are the regions where I'm from. That was where I was born. So when I go back to these places, that's the litmus test for what I try to engage with my friends in trying to help those kids see some type of a shred of a future for themselves.
Again, Vahe.
I just want to say that we tend to look at the role of Armenia and the diaspora through pre-Asian eyes because of the Soviet Union and post-Soviet years. I think the distinct boundaries have kind of disappeared. I think we have a lot of Armenians here who have been here for many years. We have newcomers. We have, there's such a large span that it's impossible to say who's diaspora and who's not. If you came 3 months ago to Los Angeles, does that make you a diaspora or an Armenian? No one knows. So it's important to know that we're all one in this spectrum.
We're getting close to the point where these are final comments. So Vahe, Irina, Anna, again, if you'd like to weigh in with any last comment on something, and to our panelists as well. Floor is open.
conclude by saying that on a very practical note, at the very least, the diaspora should really start thinking hard. First of all, its financing strategies, what types of philanthropic giving it is doing, and how they can be scaled down to support civil society. And then aside from the philanthropic contributions, but also how to link with civil society on a one-on-one basis, whether diaspora Armenians would like to get involved in the schools, talk about, and I'm not saying that diaspora Armenians know it all and the local Armenians do not, so that's obviously, it's very dangerous to promote, but I think what especially the Western diaspora possesses is coming from a culture that has the habit of pushing back against the government and has very practical skills in doing that. Globalization offers one of the best avenues of transferring and transporting that those skills all the way to the very remote villages that are out there. So I'll just simply conclude there, and I'll just thank all of the participants and panel members and for such really insightful and heartfelt contributions and the amazing role that they play for Armenia's future. This is as an Armenian citizen on my side.
And thank you as well.
We're talking about the upcoming elections, and for all of us here, it seemed that it was the most obvious sort of step that we can propose, not only as an observation of what has been going on in Armenia and being a problem, but as a participation solution, what we can do. And we thought, and we were given this advice actually from within Armenia, that maybe the best participation is through the elections. And now the next question is how we can participate to the elections. What does it entitle? Do we know or do we not know? I think actually the participation to the elections is a very simple matter. Either you really literally, it doesn't matter what generation you belong, you sort of enroll in the idea, concept, and also the belief that you can do something by being an observer, or by another token, and this is something that we talk about the diaspora, we are just generalizing. The diaspora is multifaceted, not only because of its diversity in terms of the countries that it's in, but also it's the historical diaspora versus the newer diaspora that has come out after post-Soviet reality. We do have in this diaspora very clearly dual citizenship individuals who actually don't have to go as observers to Armenia, as would be my case because I don't have a citizenship, and my participation would be as a Canadian to go to Armenia as an observer. But those who have the dual citizenship, you can do the very simple thing. Unfortunately, you cannot go to the Armenian embassy and vote because that law was taken away from you as a privilege of dual citizenship. But you can actually go to Armenia, as I would go, and vote on that day for whatever you think is the possible change. Not the best option, because there is not right now a clear opposition that you can say you can maybe go for, or maybe you believe that there is, whatever your belief is. But the one thing that you can definitely do is to go there and vote. And that vote is going to be beyond what the government can anticipate in terms of, sort of rigging or working with, because that is going to be the surprise element that you can actually introduce in a very simple way. And I would say that this is not just an option, I think it is a responsibility.
I think that's a brilliant concept, because if you have the privilege of being able to vote in Armenia, the journey you would make to go back, what that would actually signal to all of the citizens who are there, that you actually are prepared to be engaged, that it still means something to you. One of the things I found most disheartening when I was here a couple of months ago to receive a Pan-Armenian award was that the audience was full of Armenians from Armenia. And when we were talking about these issues, there seemed to be more of a concern of getting the people that were there here. like bringing them out. And I was thinking, but don't you understand what the crisis is? And it felt that there was this sense that a new Armenia could be built in Los Angeles. And that was just so shocking to me, and it just felt, that's when I really understood how perilous this whole situation is. Like, we're really talking about that? It's the stuff of comedy, right? It's the stuff of a stand-up routine, really, and I'm sure Vahe will develop it, and I'll get a royalty. But it seems to me that, that Arsinee's point is really well taken here, that it's about these types of gestures. So this is what we're at, to create these connections through, as was said so brilliantly, all change comes from the bottom up. And we are there to support the bottom, not to support the top. That's really where we are right now.
Serj, Eric, any last interjections, observations before we have to move to the final remarks?
No.
I would just like to ask everybody in the audience to consider, and please seriously consider, coming out to Armenia in April, to stand with us, to be with our brothers and sisters, to be heard, and above all, to create some sense of hope that things can get better, and they will, but it will be a long mountain, and we're all going to climb it together.
At this point, I'm going to invite back out to the podium our organizer, our sponsor, our hostess, Serj Tankian, the director of the USC Institute for Armenian Studies. She'll have, I think, some closing remarks, but also we spoke last night, maybe, Atom, if you wanted to say any final.
I think I said it.
You said it all.
I just think it's wonderful that Serj has this last word, because she's done an amazing amount of work. You are very lucky to have her here at USC, I have to say.
Thank you, but that's not why I came back out. I do want to say a few thank yous. Silva and Susanna and I and our student staff are really, really, really proud and grateful to you. This audience has been amazing. You've been there every minute. You've responded. Thank you to you. That's a first. Absolutely. Second, and most importantly, thank you to this amazing network of passionate, knowledgeable people who just have to be asked once. And they're all here, and I would ask very much that please, if Marc and Brett and Hisham can also stand, and our panelists, Eric and Serj, Irina, Anna, Vahe, Arsinee, Atom, and Vahe, and Rob, English, they've just been incredible. Thank you to you. Thank you. Before I invite you out to share coffee and tea with us, you saw the tech team. You know we could have done this with all of you sitting at home, right? We could have done this, you could have been at home in bed watching, but you're here. And let's please share these emotions, these comments, and these reactions together. Join us for coffee and tea directly across the street in the von Kleinsmith Center, which is the building where the Institute of Armenian Studies is housed, where the School of International Relations is housed.
And underneath the tall tower with the globe on top, just in case you get turned around, right over there.
Absolutely.
Can't miss
where
it.
the School of Policy is housed. We're in a really good location with incredible neighbors, and we invite you to come see what we do every day. And finally, share the video. This is a conversation that needs to continue. The video will be up, both in Armenian and English. Please share. We have with us here, and I wanted to acknowledge the presence of two members of parliament. Edmond Marukyan and Aram Zaveni Sargsyan are both here, and I am sure they would be happy to engage in conversation with you. Thank you. Thank you. Please join us.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're amazing. my